Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Everyone seems to be complaining these days about television. Too much sex, too much violence, too much commercialism, fewer quality programs, present company excluded. Is television really that bad? Has it gotten worse? Or are the programs on TV the ones the public wants to watch? And if the public likes them, isn't that the whole idea? Joining us to sort through the conflict and consensus are the co-authors of the new book, Down the Tube, an inside account of the failure of American television. They are William Baker, President and CEO of the PBS station in New York, WNET, and George Dessart, Professor of Television and Radio at Brooklyn College of the City University of New York. Also joining us is Irwin Stelzer, Director of Regulatory Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, longtime advisor to the News Corporation, and co-author of Markets and the Media, a discussion on television. On television, is TV going down the tube? This week on Think Tank. Television bashing is popular sport. Many blame TV for such social ills as crime, teenage drug use, and premarital sex. Critics point to the daytime talk shows that encourage antic brawls, like Jerry Springer, to primetime sitcoms full of sexual innuendo and outuendo. At the least, television has changed dramatically from its early years. In their new book, Down the Tube, an inside account of the failure of American television, two of our guests argue that over-commercialism and a lack of government regulation have caused a decline in the quality of program. They say most shows now pander to our most base interests, and that the primary purpose of the huge corporations that control what we watch is simply to make a buck. Others say the programs on television are the ones people want to watch, and that Americans should be able to choose whatever they like. One thing is certain, television has become a permanent and important part of our lives. The percentage of American households that own a color television set is nearly 100%, and we watch television for an average of 7 hours each day. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let me begin on this side of the room, if I might, and ask the co-authors of this book, Down the Tube, what is wrong with television, starting with you, Bill Baker?
I would say the problem with television is that for a thing as powerful as it is, to aim only for the bottom line is to aim too low, and that's what's happening in our society today.
George?
I would say that we really have failed to realize the potential of this medium, and that's cheating a whole generation of Americans.
What's wrong with that?
Well, I think using the term bottom line as a pejorative is wrong. To get to the bottom line, you have to satisfy people by showing programs they want to see. So it's a form of democracy, if you will, to maximize your bottom line.
What's wrong with that?
That presupposes an infinite menu, and that presupposes an infinite menu from which people can choose. But our thesis is that there is a limited menu, and when that menu is saturated with programs that are essentially debasing the medium, if not indeed the audience, then something's wrong.
And there's something else about television that's different than other kind of consumer products, and that is television affects the mind. It is part of a broader cultural entity, and that in a sense, what the argument that says we're giving the audience what they want, and some of my commercial friends say, well, we're giving them what they deserve, is really perhaps more of a product of conditioning, like adding Valium to the drinking water or something. You kind of get used to it.
Well,
go ahead, Aaron.
Well, first of all, every time somebody has a product and they say that mine is different, it's somehow important, I tend to hold on to my wallet because that's usually a predicate for some relief from market forces, for some relief from satisfying consumer demand. As for your point about this being limited, we're about to enter an age of 200-channel television. We now have 80 in most areas, 65 in some. There's plenty of room on these channels for niche television of all sorts, satisfying anybody who wants it.
What you two co-authors are saying, in effect, and there's much to admire in this book, I must say, but is that you know better, that you collectively, you, the government, ought to set down rules as to what the people ought to watch. And I will tell you, Irwin says he holds on to his wallet when people start asking for exemptions. I hold on to my wallet when the government wants to tell me what I ought to listen to.
That's not really what we're calling for. What we bring to public attention is the fact that nobody ever really sat down and said, what is it? What can this medium do? What do we want of this medium? How do we want that to
There have
happen?
been so many. Nobody's ever sat down. I mean,
Not really.
you
Not
could
really.
fill this studio with reports. I mean, you mentioned them: the Carnegie Report, and the Hoover Report, and the second Carnegie Report. I mean,
which were specifically addressing the questions of public television.
right.
But we had been talking about commercial television.
I see. Okay.
And let me go back to that. Nobody ever really said, should we have a commercial system at all? Should we? And if we do, under what circumstances? If we do not, under what circumstances? We've never had that kind of dialogue that has occurred in a number of countries.
So that's a peculiar mindset, and let me explain why. Number one, no one ever sat down and said, what kind of oil industry shall we have? Or what kind of steel industry shall we have? Or what kind of automobile industry shall we have? We decided a long time ago to have industries that respond to what consumers want. As for the
Irwin,
other part of the
industries-
mindset, let me finish.
Yeah.
There's three aspects of it. The second is that your book, which I think is wonderful on the history, seems to me to fail to rise above the notion of spectrum scarcity. We are now in an age where we're not talking about scarcity anymore. We're talking about such a huge demand, and I can tell you this because I'm involved with News Corp and other people, that such a huge demand for product, for things to put on television, that the balance of power has shifted to program providers. And third, the model of other countries, which if you study what's going on in Germany or you study the trials and tribulations of BBC, those are very bad models.
Irwin, I'd like to put a pin in a couple things that you said. First of all, the concept of program scarcity. I'm in the television business. I've been in the television business for 40 years, 35 of those, or 30 of those being commercial television. And I can tell you, talk to any producer in America, any independent producer in America, and nobody will say there's program scarcity. As a matter of fact, it's the other way around. There's distribution scarcity. And even with cable, many of the cable systems and the News Corporation had that problem in New York. Couldn't get distribution in New York and had to do a lot of things
Then why are people going around
to solve that.
in the
Ben,
industry?
and also I want to put a pin in
okay.
something that you said, and that is we think we know what's right and we think we should decide what's on television. We feel exactly the opposite. But we think the American people have really not had a chance to discuss what to do. And this, in the right of ways that cable run down and the airwaves that the American public broadcast, these stations broadcast over our assets, ultimately of the American people.
The American people individually own the most democratic device in the history of the world, which is a television clicker. As Irwin points out, you have 60 channels there. If you're a cable subscriber, not as many if you're not a cable subscriber, and you can say, here's what I want, here's what I don't want.
I own another democratic device in my house, and it's called a mailbox, but I can tell the U.S. Postal Service I don't want pornographic mail delivered to me. Why can't I say the same
You can.
Well,
about
You can.
television?
You can block out any channel you don't like.
And you have laws passed by the Congress of the United States, enforced by the FCC. saying you can't say these 7 words, you can't put on this kind of program, you can't put on that kind of program.
The laws as enforced by the FCC in an industry that is television industry that's better than 50 years old. There have only been 2 television stations in the entire history of the American television industry that have ever lost its license. So I hardly view strict enforcement as any.
It shows how afraid people are to lose their license.
How, and it shows how historically they actually paid attention to that license because they knew that the possibility of challenge was there. The possibility of challenge has been removed, and the FCC has lost a great deal of its powers. What we are seeing instead is we are hearing those 7 words daily in one form or another, if that be the criterion. We are also seeing a debasing of American culture in certain respects.
Well, but why do you say, if you were prepared to make these value judgments about debasing and poor quality, and you're saying that something other than the market ought to decide that, or ought to help decide that, you are ultimately talking about government or government-appointed boards, trusteeships, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that is the theme that runs throughout this book.
Not necessarily, not necessarily. We have lost the self-regulation that was a hallmark of American broadcasting. And American broadcasters understood that there was a difference between broadcasting and the automobile or the petroleum that we make use of. And there was a very effective self-regulatory process. That has disappeared.
And the notion of television people sitting down and deciding what is fit for people to see, people who can decide for themselves by going, as Ben said, click, I don't want to see you anymore, makes me very nervous.
Let me give you an example that's very current and that I think really bespeaks what I'm talking about and what Bill is talking about. Several weeks ago, we had that horrible event on the Los Angeles freeway where the man stopped his car, stopped traffic, set fire to first his car, then his dog, then himself, then got a shotgun and blew his brains out. And at least 2 stations, in the name of competition, interrupted children's programs, one a cartoon show, another a live children's program, in order to show this. One of them in a very tight shot when the man blew his brains out. Now, self-regulation, self-discipline, some sense of what the covenant between the broadcaster and the audience should be could have prevented that.
If you want, you're saying it's competition that drove them to this.
Exactly.
How would you have had that work? Would you have had all the television people in Los Angeles call each other up and say, look, let's not show this?
No. What would have happened in the kind of world that I think any one of the 4 of us would like to have, what would have happened is that a value judgment would be made by the news director or whoever's running that station. We have a child audience, and this situation could go in any direction. It's already out of control. We're not going to interrupt the program for that.
The predicate of your book, and it's right up front, you say people always tell you, how come television's so bad? Why is it getting worse? All over the world, in every country of the world, people watch American television. Not only do they watch American television, they watch American television to the exclusion of their own local television. So somebody likes it. Now, the predicate further is that this is sort of tawdry kind of stuff and flamboyant and sexy and violent and so on and so forth. I would just like to relate one conversation that I had with Sidney Pollack, who is a distinguished American film director. And I said, what are American movies about? And he said something very interesting. He said, they're all about the same thing. The hero shapes destiny. pretty,
That's nice.
real nice.
Nicely said.
Nicely said and true, I think. And I have lots of problems with American movies and American television, both the entertainment side and the news side. But American television is telling stories. They're showing individualism of heroes shaping destiny. Some of these are grubby, ugly stories. Some of them are terrific, movies and television. The people are making that decision. You keep saying you don't want government to do it, but your book comes out for government-appointed boards to regulate this.
I mean, there is a public ferment. There's a discussion right now. The American public is speaking out, and they're saying something is wrong. And our attempt here in this Down the Tube book is to say, here's how we got to where how we got there. And we got there through a series of non-regulations, bad regulations, or unintended consequences of regulations. And we are at a threshold. We are at a point where it is generally agreed, even though television is incredibly popular in this country, and American television is popular all over the world. Baywatch is one of the most popular shows in world television. There's no getting around that. There's no getting around that. But everyone still feels, even everyone who's watching Baywatch, hey, maybe there's some unfulfilled promise here. And we suggest a couple things. One is that the American public should start talking about it as we are here. The other is that there are many options, and one of the options could be tax law changes that say, for example, because of the pressure on the bottom line, there are very few public service announcements on television. It used to be mandated by law that you had to do a certain number of public service announcements. Why not give a tax credit for that to get some of that back on the air? I mean, there are many things that could be done.
Look at the contradiction at the heart of that. When I read the book, which I think is a wonderful book, when you got to the point of annual appropriations for public television, you walked away from that for a variety of reasons. In other words, that area of accountability didn't appeal to you either. The market didn't. Annual accountability to the taxpayers who'd be paying for this didn't appeal to you either. Now, that's because there's a contradiction at the heart of this. It's very clear with BBC. If people are paying taxes, everyone, to support public television,
as they do in England.
As they do in England, and they come around and arrest you if you don't pay your license fee. They arrested 600 people last year for not paying a license fee. I don't know if we'd like trucks driving around America with these things, pulling people out of their houses. But the contradiction is that as it has lost market share, BBC, because of incredibly boring programming, but as it's lost market share so that it's now down to about a third of the market, everyone is saying, wait a minute, why should all of us pay for what a third of the people are watching? We don't want to do that. So it loses its ability to demand public funding unless it gets popular. So what is it doing? Game shows. Right. It's trying to win back rating points because it must do that to maintain its funding rights.
And of course, that's a fear of what could happen
you
in
want
American
to be immune
public television
even from
as well.
that.
I mean, that's one of the things that greatly concerns us as American public television becomes more and more reliant on corporate funders and others.
But you see, what you want no accountability either to the market or to the taxpayer. That was fine when it was private funds, the Ford Foundation or Eli Lilly or the generous people who support public television. But you don't want to be responsible to the people who watch television because their eyeballs, the counting of their eyeballs is what drives things. You don't want to be responsible to the taxpayer because that would require annual appropriation. You do want to be responsible to, as I understand it, various governing boards who will decide what's good for everybody. I don't think that's such a hot idea.
We're not prepared to tell what the model should be. As a matter of fact, what we're suggesting is the exact opposite, that the American public should discuss what the model should be.
Look, I have children who are age 40, 38, 36, and 14. Okay, so I've been through...
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have been through this twice. The amount of crap on television now, these gentlemen are quite right, is up to about here. I mean, now, as a free marketeer, but who is interested in the well-being of American children, how do you get rid of that? What do you do about it?
Well, first of all, why would you want to get rid of it? Turn it off.
No.
It's about that.
Irwin, give me a break. A 14-year-old girl, you're telling her to turn off the television set?
You're telling me you can't control your 14-year-old
You got
daughter?
it. When you have 5 television sets in the house and a 14-year-old girl, you got it, right.
Well, and so you would craft public policy around the inability of you to control what your daughter watches on television. I think that's a bad idea. And
why can't we zone it, not censor it, why can't we zone it in such a way that if you turn on your television set in the living room at 7:30 or 8 or 8:30, you don't get programs where people are getting drilled through the eyes and where everything is jiggling? What would be so terrible about that?
Because there's 2 kinds of television. They have those rules in Britain, by the way, where at certain time periods you can't show certain
You thought I wasn't going to go after him.
Violent programs.
In Australia.
In Australia. But there's a big difference. The cable channels that you're talking about, broadcast television doesn't present much of a violent problem during family hours. I mean, if you think about what's on those, it's cable television, which you are paying for and inviting into your home. Don't take it. If you don't
Broadcast
want it.
television is doing a pretty good job of getting down there. Maybe
No,
because
not,
of the
not during
competition.
family time. If you look, you'll see what's on there. I mean, I yesterday went through your favorite publication, TV Guide, just to see what was on during family hours on different things. And the big problem, from if you don't like violence, now there's different views on this. As you know, the liberals like sex and don't like violence,
What
and
time of night
conservatives
was
like
the
violence and don't like liberals.
Seinfeld program on masturbation aired at what time of night?
I don't remember. Is that about
8 o'clock,
8:00?
8:30?
But you see, but again, Ben, that is a judgment by you as to what is culturally acceptable. If you find it unacceptable, turn it off.
For my sins, I was head of program practices at CBS for several years. And it's not quite as easy as it would seem. There was no warning at that time, nor could there be. Seinfeld was generally a program that was culturally accepted, certainly by a broad swath of the American public, and deservedly so for the most part.
Yeah, it's a good program.
But was that something that should have been on, that might have been discussed? The mechanisms for that no longer exist.
But look what's happened. You in your book, I think, say some nice things about The Simpsons. For instance, I think you said it was an innovative program. I'm
Yes,
not sure.
we did
As I
say that.
recall. I have colleagues at the AEI who think The Simpsons should not be allowed on the air because it breeds disrespect for family authority. How would you cope with the fact that Ben doesn't like one episode of Seinfeld? I have colleagues who don't like The Simpsons. How would you handle all
We'd
of
let
that?
them run. We'd let those kinds of shows. We're not talking about micromanaging about public taste in any spectrum. But we don't want that to happen. We're First Amendment believers.
Great.
What
I'm with you.
What we are talking about is that it is possible to gauge where the American public is at a particular time. I would say that in the interests of sensationalism, television has been racing far faster than the American public. And as a result, there is a great dissatisfaction out there. And as a result, there is a lot of imitative work that debases it still further.
But let me just go around the room very quickly, because we are out of time, and ask you each briefly to tell me, if you were an American citizen and a television set owner, given the problems you see in this industry, what would you advise them to do?
I would advise them to be very careful about what they see and to view television as not just a source of accurate information, but as a tool that is a part of commerce, and to judge that accordingly.
I would ask that they pick up on the discussion that we've had and other discussions of this nature, and that they begin to discuss with their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues, what they wish from television, what they get from television, and what they think television is doing. And it may be that the answer will be that they are very much in favor of it. I don't think so. I think that they will find that there is much to be done and they can do it.
Irwin?
I would applaud the increase in the ability to exercise choice that results from the proliferation of channels, from more sophisticated blocking devices, from the use of the remote, the intelligent use of the remote, from subscription pay television so that you can buy a la carte television, everything that increases the range of a person's ability to receive program he wants and not receive programs he doesn't want.
My advice is simple: use the clicker. Thank you, Bill Baker, Irwin Stelzer, and George Dessart. And thank you for Think Tank. I'm Ben Wattenberg.
We at Think Tank depend on your views to make our show better. Please send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or email us at thinktank@pbs.org. To learn more about Think Tank, visit PBS online at www.pbs.org. And please let us know where you watch Think Tank. This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.